Good evening, everybody. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig a little bit deeper. This is episode 64.2. It's our indie spotlight for this set of episodes. And throughout the year, we've been watching indies from 5 years ago. We're still in our 2020 season, so we're still doing indies from 2015. But this is the last 2015 indie that we will be spotlighting. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl is the film for discussion for tonight. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here for this evening. I'm back in Astoria, New York, where I'm cat sitting. The cat is just off camera there, Linus. I was here in previous episodes for you diehard fans, and I was here for episode 55.1, where we talked about the film Stuber in July of 2019. And I was here in September 2019 for episode 56.3, where we talked about the film Driving Miss Daisy. And now I'm back. I've got a couple co-hosts that are here to discuss tonight's film with me. Let me introduce you to them now. First, my nerdy wannabe sound designer who watches too much Werner Herzog. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Polis is here.
Hi, Jonathan.
Welcome back, Matty, for our indie spotlight. And also my terminally ill composer friend who doesn't need new friends right now, Patrick Taylor is here.
Hello, hello.
Before we get started, let me talk about the schedule for this, our 64th series of episodes. Started last Thursday with our review of our current feature. Of course, tonight is the indie spotlight. And this upcoming Thursday will be our classic movie discussion of the film The Jolson Story from 1946. And next Monday will be our 48th Sound Off, our freeform segment. Patrick will be back for that. We're going to play the movie game. Devin's going to be there to do a diatribe. And we're going to count down the top 5 actor biopics. And that's coming up a week from tonight. The trivia that I said on the last indie that gave you a hint for tonight is it was one more indie from 2015 to round out our 6th regular season. And it was a big winner at Sundance that year. This film, Me and the Earl and Dying Girl, just missed my top 10 of 2015, and it was produced by the creator of This Is Us. Dan Fogelman was one of the producers of the film, which won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance in January of that year of 2015. And it's time to do summary. You guys ready for summary?
Yes.
All right. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. High school student Greg Gaines hears about a classmate who is diagnosed with leukemia, someone he is only mildly acquainted with. His mother forces him to visit the sick girl, thinking it will make him feel better. What starts out as a forced hangout surprises them both by blossoming into a real friendship. But Greg may not be quite mature enough to handle being friends with someone who may not have long to live. Guys, how was that summary?
Good, but you completely skipped over Earl.
Well, we can get to Earl. Patrick criticized the summary for The Princess Bride as well, I think. Patrick needs to start doing the summaries whenever he's on the show. I forgot to make him do it this time, but next time, definitely. Matt, say something nice about my summary.
It was a good broad strokes introduction to our conversation.
That's the plan. Now the question for both of you guys is that I always ask before we do an indie is, had you guys seen or heard of this movie before I made you watch it for tonight? No. Matty?
I was aware of it. When it comes out, I'm aware of films, festival winners, but I have not seen it. I didn't know what to expect, so I came into it pretty fresh.
I love introducing them to things, whether they like it or not. Sometimes it drags them kicking and screaming. The way we do indies a little differently for the indie spotlight, where one of us recommends the film and presents it almost like a dissertation. And this, like most indies, is my recommendation. It was our last indie of our 6th season, like I said. And so it's the last one we're going to do from 2015. And I was going back and forth between 2 films to recommend, and I think I made the wrong choice. Whatever good memories I had of this film were tarnished by this latest viewing, where the contrivances and sloppiness of the screenplay weighed much more heavily on my opinion than I recall. With that said, the film still has enough moments of power and charm, largely driven by the unique detailed performances of its young leads. Both performances made my top 5 of 2015 in their respective categories of Best Actor and Best Supporting Actress, and I stand by that. But I'm going to dig into some reasons why the film didn't charm me as much this time around. So it's time for these guys to tell me their opening thoughts. One sentence. Patrick, you're usually a little better about the one sentence. What'd you think?
I loved it. Never cried so hard in the morning before in my life.
All right, he watched in the morning. Good to know. Matty P.
I really like most movies that have a strong cinematic point of view, which this had, and for better or for worse each time, but it definitely had this style to it, which I loved. I thought the characters and the story was great, and I really enjoyed it as well.
That was a much longer opening thought than Patrick's. Matt's newer to the show. We're still breaking him in on opening thoughts. Patrick, what did you like most about it?
I really liked the how they developed the characters, how we followed this young kid, how it felt authentic that this is what kids do. They try to be cool with everyone. I like their approach to high school. I like the kind of quirkiness of the family, of pretty much every adult. And I like the interplay between the friendships. It was just like a very warm friendship story, you know? And
there's a lot to unpack there. A lot of those things, the Quirk in particular, I found really contrived this time around. I will say that the one thing that I sort of agree with you on, you talked about the kids and the characters. For me, the movie, if it's successful at all, it's the two leads that make it successful, Thomas Mann and Olivia Cook. Starting off with Thomas Mann, I think it's one of the more honest executions of a modern teenager than I've seen. In some ways, it's very similar to Miles Teller in The Spectacular Now, which is a film we reviewed, episode, I think it was 47.2. Very similar to that performance in the use of humor as a defense mechanism, but also very different in the sense that he beautifully captures the character's struggles with self-esteem. There's an emotional immaturity to the character that Thomas Mann, the actor, manages to lay bare in front of us in a way that I find to be uniquely insightful for a young actor. The way he lashes out when cornered with as little confidence as when he wants to be straightforward. It's not the kind of performance that gets acknowledged a lot because it doesn't feature a lot of histrionics, but I found it to be extremely thorough, vivid, and identifiable. Thomas Mann, I thought, was really, really strong. Patrick, is that sort of in line with what you were saying?
definitely. It didn't feel like he was playing himself. It felt like a very natural portrayal of how awkward I would have been if I went to that high school. You know?
And how awkward you are now. Matty P, Thomas Mann.
I liked him a lot. Performance-wise, I like all the actors and characters very much. Except for the sideline characters that were like the minority clubs of one, kind of. The high school students felt a little bit too characterish.
I agree with that. And I'm going to unpack that too. But I do want to say some nice, we always try to start positive if we can on the show. So I do want to say some nice things about Olivia Cook. As good as Thomas Mann is, in my estimation, his career didn't take off for whatever reason in the last 5 years the way that Olivia Cook's has. She's since been given the opportunity to prove her impressive range in films like Ready Player One and Thoroughbreds. Sometimes there's an argument that playing someone with a terminal illness is low-hanging fruit for critics of performances, but I still found Olivia's portrayal of Rachel to be fresh and detailed. Her mood swings feel very organic and expertly navigated. We've seen many people dying in movies, even many teenagers, but Cook somehow makes it not feel maudlin or manipulative. I find it to be a very genuine portrayal of someone facing the possibility of their life ending at an unimaginable age. If the film has any emotional impact at all, I think it's because of the work that she and Mann do that really make this land.
I don't disagree with anything you said. She was believable. She definitely wasn't always the same. She had a nice organic ebb and flow to her character and to her reactions and how she engaged with the people around her.
Patrick.
No, she was wonderful, captivating, and she definitely made you love her. She was really great.
Now, here's where I get to the disagreement part. I'm sort of going to agree with Matt in the sense my next little bit was about the supporting performances. And I don't really blame the actors here. I feel like almost every other performance in the movie was handicapped by one-note writing. And I don't know if I thought about that the first time I watched, but certainly watching it for tonight, it was very apparent to me. The characters of the quirky dad, or the hot girl, or the hip teacher, or the nagging mother, or the grieving mother coping with alcohol, they all sort of floundered due to lack of dimension on the page. And Patrick, even Earl to me was something of a weak character on the page because I feel like he more or less operated as a conscience for Greg. Sometimes he even wondered if he was a real character as opposed to just an aspect of Greg's personality a la Fight Club. I'm not saying that's the case, but I wondered it because he seemed to be playing a very specific role in the screenplay. And so as a character, it's not like he bumped for me in any one moment. I just don't feel like he got a chance to really develop the character. Matt, I think you were even talking about some of the more tertiary characters than I am. I'm talking about everybody else pretty much except for Greg and Rachel. They all felt a little flat to me.
I do agree with you that a lot of the characters were one note. I kind of think, you know, just looking at this as African American, a lot of the African American characters were hypersexualized and a little bit crazy. White people were goth or weirdos, you know. So everyone was kind of put in their corners and they were kind of left to do their one job in the story. I put away the ridiculousness of the characters and I thought the friendship was really cool.
I agree with that. Especially when all three of them are together, me and Earl and the dying girl. When all three of them are together, I think I said in the beginning, there's some really strong scenes in there, and you know, when they're together, that's among them. Their friendship feels very natural. There's chemistry between the three of them as actors. I just feel like the character wound up flat and no fault of his own. Matt,
as you're saying these things, I don't disagree at all with your assessment, but I feel like when I watched it, it didn't bother me because these ancillary characters felt like the stylization of the cinematography and the editing and the things that kind of made this like a sort of Wes Anderson Jr. movie. That there's ancillary characters there that serve a purpose, whether it's humor or to support an idea, and they are one-dimensional. And it's so uniformly true that I feel like it must be intentional, which doesn't mean it worked for you. They've got these three main characters, and then you have the world around them, which is, somewhat stylized, kind of quirky filmmaking.
I see that point, but also like in something like Wes Anderson does, everything is that. There's scenes of like pure honesty, of raw emotion that fly in the face of that sort of quirk, which often I find to be quirk for quirk's sake. So I felt like it was like this weird hybrid. I do feel like there's a tonal issue there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in direction, because I think that this film is like inspired by other films as opposed to an organic original, which maybe Wes Anderson, for example, is the original, and it inspires other things. And this is somewhat of an inspiration of that, which means it's a little bit watered down version of
like Wes Anderson light. And I can see that point. But I mean, I guess the point is Rahone is no Wes Anderson. He's got a long way to go before he gets there.
I don't know. I found a lot of similarities, but I also found it to be original enough where it didn't just feel like a knockoff. I feel like there's a nice inspiration lineage there, and I like that. Somewhat inspired by, not fully fleshed out on its own.
Wes Anderson finds the human emotion, without ever abandoning that quirk. But I mean, like, so it has all these quirky characters, but then these two in the middle that are anything but, that don't seem to fit in that one note world that we're all talking about. So Wes Anderson, everything is sort of in sync, and in this film, not so much. So I mean, like, I feel like in that sense, they're sort of hurting each other. I think
two universes that they're not. There's either there shouldn't be a bridge because there shouldn't be two universes, or if there is a bridge, it needs to be a little more cohesive.
Yeah, especially because, and I think I'll get to this, or maybe I'm getting to it now. But I mean, like, I feel like the issue of the quirk dulls the impact of some of the emotional truths, or the emotional truth sort of sucks the energy out of the quirk. Either way, it's sort of not gelling together.
They're trying to put in the elements of a hit Hollywood kind of a movie. So they're putting in the quirky sidekick. They're putting in the cool teacher. They're doing all the tropes that could work in an MTV movie world. But they're trying to weave this story that I guess would never get through Hollywood because it's such a sad story. But you know what they're doing. They're throwing in some lovable characters.
We're definitely getting on Screenplay now, and I found those elements to be contrived. I have that contrivance bell that goes off. Not only does it takes me out, but I feel like it dulls the impact of the emotion. But I will say, this is my second watching, as Linus makes an appearance here. And I did cry the first time I watched it. I expected to cry this time. I did not. Staying as positive as we can, I want to segue to direction before we, unload, or before I unload on the screenplay anyway. The direction I found to be a mixed bag of outstanding stuff and overcooked stuff, which we're sort of hinting at already. The film worked best when director Rahone plopped the camera down in an advantageous place and just allowed his gifted actors to work within it. Those moments were real and honest. There's a scene at the end of the second act where he's a very low angle with her in the foreground and Greg moves around in the background. In spite of how perfectly framed it is, it never feels staged, and the acting out is outstanding. It might very well be the best scene in the movie. In the early scenes, he was very wise to not frame them together, meaning Rachel and Greg. As their relationship developed, he started to put them in frames at the same time, which is very intelligent filmmaking. However, there were moments where he was injecting style unnecessarily that detracted from the impact, like the staging of the cafeteria scenes, for example, were a little over the top and stylistic, and to Matt's point, maybe even ripped off from Wes Anderson. Those fast dollies, for example, are very much out of Wes Anderson. Or he would turn the camera sideways for no reason really that is born out of the material of the script. Or he would have a forced transition between scenes. These sort of moments reeked of a young director trying to inject himself into the proceedings instead of allowing the story to unfold in an organic, natural way. And also, he crossed the 180-degree line on occasion, another classic rookie mistake, and you guys know how I feel about that. Anything on this sort of mixed bag of Rahone's work here?
Do you think those are all his ideas?
Either way, the director is responsible for those ideas. The director is responsible for what winds up on the screen. Even if it didn't originate with him, he said yes and did it and executed it. He's the director. It's his responsibility. So it's going to go in this section.
Yeah, so I would agree. Some of it was a little forced and just overly stylized. I did like the way he put two people in frames, similar to what you're suggesting. I liked some of it. You could do away with some of the whip pans.
What it ultimately boils down to in this, it's about not trusting your audience, forcing the style to sort of thrust the ideas in their face and sort of letting things unfold. And all these good things that I talked about, I see skill, like I see potential there, like I see lots of positive things, but he's got to stop crossing the line. I won't accept it. Matty P.
I always hesitate to criticize any director for it's hard to make a movie, and you say it's like first time rookie mistakes, and I have a hard time with that. But if I'm going to say anything about that, it seems like this is his first movie, so he's doing all of his ideas now and putting them in the movie that are not all bad ideas. But for example, one that stood out to me, I think you mentioned, is the 90-degree thing, which I was like, that's a really cool shot. And it goes like this, and it's like all kind of crazy. But what's the point of that? I liked it, but I also was like, what's the point? Well,
I like the look of it, but it's not motivated by anything in the script.
He thought of it, and he's like, I might not give another chance to put it in a movie, perhaps, and this is a really good opportunity. I'm going to put it in. And like the movies kind of had those things in there.
First of all, I want to address, this comes up every now and then, because yes, there's a young director that we are criticizing, I suppose. I feel like it goes without saying, as all of us have made films and worked on films for years and years and years, so we know how difficult it is. The mere accomplishment of finishing a film is an extraordinary achievement. And I feel like I say it every now and then on the show, but it bears repeating. I certainly know that. However, we are a film review show. This is a finished product in terms of our viewers who are film aficionados, or in some cases even young people looking to learn about film. It's worthwhile to just sort of dissect what works about the film and what doesn't, in order for maybe young people to look at these things from a different perspective. It's not about being mean. It is about taking a finished piece and sort of looking at what worked and what didn't, and why it didn't. Certainly it is important for me to tell young directors that crossing the 180-degree line is sort of not an acceptable practice. And a lot of times it's done by accident, or nobody on set is thinking about it. And I want to make sure people are. That's all.
Yep. Nice.
I actually thought he did a great job filling the mise-en-scène, which is something that young directors generally struggle with. But I thought the detail within most of the interiors was really, really extraordinary. All the primary interiors feature either remnants of some of the films that Greg and Earl made, clues to some secrets Rachel has, or pieces of the past that led to their respective characters, whether it be the journey of Greg's parents or the divorce of Rachel's parents, even the school itself. And they may have just gotten lucky as far as this is concerned, but even the school itself had sort of sayings and writings and motifs written on the wall that wound up actually being commentary on some of the scenes that were happening in the school and in certain moments.
In essence, it's just a bunch of conversations, a bunch of different rooms. But those rooms have a lot of detail about the characters in them. The teacher's room, I've never seen an office like that for a teacher, but it was great. And it kind of related to his, research thing, like he's about the art of education. And obviously the girls' room, just the little details of the squirrels jumping on the trees. That was so touching because, that was something she shared with her father.
I think it's time to dig into the screenplay. And this is where I might start to get a little mean. But I will say something nice about it. I admit that part of the film's charm is that it has a certain amount of cleverness that adds laughs. Greg as a character is smart and witty with some cute observations on things that I found entertaining at times. And as much as I dislike the idea that he's a young filmmaker, the films within the films are clever-ish, even if they don't add anything to the depth of the film. But so many other aspects of the script feel very young, as in underdeveloped, and rife with the kind of mistakes you find in new screenwriters. I mentioned in the performance section that the tertiary characters all feel flat and are defined by a single characteristic. That's a screenwriting issue that none of those actors were able to overcome. Those of you who watch the show know that I'm going to hate the idea of structuring a film as a college essay. The voiceover and faux diegetic commentary throughout robs the film of maximum impact to me. This is based in a book, and in that format, a first-person narrator can often be very evocative. But here it just feels lazy. And then finally, the elements of contrivance just added up to me. Patrick earlier mentioned a certain misdirection that the voiceover does. I found that idea to be kind of cheap. The arc of the relationship with the hot girl, Madison, also bumped for me. It felt kind of like a movie-ish kind of shift in that relationship that didn't feel authentic. Rachel's artwork, it's an idea that's planted sort of early on as a sort of secret, but it sort of comes full circle all too conveniently. All of these things suggest a complete lack of trust for the audience that I was insinuating at earlier. The voiceover often connects the dots for the audience and tries to do the emotional work for us that the scenes are supposed to do, and often they were doing. And thus the voiceover becomes condescending, repetitive, and unnecessary. This film could have been, and in my opinion should have been, rooted in those scenes between Greg and Rachel with the occasional addition of Earl. That was the story, and everything else was sort of a wasteful distraction. Smoke and mirrors and style, almost avoiding the heart of the matter the way that Greg does as a character. There were moments of powerful honesty, but all those contrivances sucked the impact out of those moments and left us with something that was ultimately too artificial to be when it needed to be grounded. And that sort of sums up everything I've been sort of insinuating at over the course of the show. So guys, that's my screenplay diatribe, if you will. How do you respond?
Although I ended up liking Earl and Greg very much, at the beginning, they both seemed like different characters to me, and I'm divided whether that means my experience of them or it's a dynamic character or it's misleading at first. For example, Greg seems to open up with that montage of liking everybody and being liked by everybody. And
a montage driven by voiceover, I'd like to point out.
He's kind of like a Ferris Bueller type. But then immediately when the movie actually started, he became much more insular and insecure, and the guy that we ended up knowing for the rest of the film, which was not the guy from the beginning. There was a disconnect for me.
I actually bought that disconnect, but I interpreted that to be the voiceover sort of portraying how he wants to be seen and then us seeing how he actually is, sort of that dichotomy.
Okay.
You said something that was illuminating to me. You said you cried when you first watched the film. That's because they manipulated you just right. You said it right. If I watched this the second time, I would see all the little holes. But I'm watching this thing thinking, every time he said, this girl's not going to die, I believed him.
I never did.
I always believed them. It kills me. I was like, okay, this is a trying to be Hollywood film. Okay, it's going to have a happy ending, and then I'm going to hate it for it. It lied to me in just the right way.
Do you feel like they needed to do that? Like, I almost feel like it was unnecessary.
They didn't need to do it, but they did, and they ripped my heart out.
Which is exactly the kind of manipulation. It was unnecessary and cheap. Honestly, you could have had the whole film, could have been a play in her room, and I could have seen all 209 days of their doomed friendship. And that would have been more compelling to me because I would have been I think, more emotionally invested. With those two actors, you didn't need all the bells and whistles because they were delivering the goods and you didn't need the manipulation. So it feels like a missed opportunity. You're both talking about how I'm a little critical at times, but I mean, I will be harsher with something that I feel like had potential or should have been better with the material that they had.
It's coming clear to me what's kind of missing, which is Wes Anderson, he has a universe. The film is its own universe. The grammar of the film is presented to you, you understand it, and you live within it. This film, the stuff in the teacher's office was trying to be on the side of quirky kind of like stuff that you find as opposed to the reality of the rest of the film. It blends these two worlds, which is very grounded reality and then fanciful filmmaker stuff. And there was no like clear distinction between them, and they just kind of bled into each other. And for me, that creates a little bit of a mushy grammar for the movie and a universe that's not quite holistic.
I think that's exactly at the root of my issue with the film.
It was the characters that was this film. It was their chemistry. It really wasn't the camera work or anything else for me.
With that said, I do think that there's going to be some stuff to dig into this next section. I think Patrick likes this section. Patrick, what's coming up now?
The T word?
With a little more conviction, please. It's the T word, ladies and gentlemen. This is the section where we talk about themes of the film, ladies and gentlemen. Call it the T word because one of our old members, Davey, used to not like talking about themes, and so we had to dance around it, calling it the T word, and a new section was born. For me, guys, the theme that I was thinking about the most, it might be obvious, but I don't think it's in the way that you suspect. Mortality is what I was thinking of as far as this film is concerned, but specifically about the rite of passage related to mortality that we all go through. Now, obviously, we all know from a young age that everybody dies. But at some point, it becomes a reality. It sinks in. And that first time might be the most impactful, almost like that first love. The film goes to great pains to suggest that this is not about first love for Greg, but it might, for lack of a better phrase, be about first death. And I know for me, I had a cousin commit suicide when I was 15. And while my brain knew that everyone would eventually die, it hit me harder and literally frightened me more than any other death I've experienced subsequently. Even the death of my own father. There might be something there where, both in my case and in the film, the victim died at a very young age, something uniquely tragic about someone who really didn't get much of a chance. And therein lies the lesson for both me and Greg. In the death of someone so close to our own ages at the time, it's a sober but important reminder of how precious this time is. We're often told, even at my advanced age, is that we have time to do this or to do that. But that's ultimately a fallacy. Further underscored by the fact that our country this year has lost 300,000 plus in a way that we never could have foreseen 14 months ago. In showing Greg confronting mortality for the first time, it connects to the first time we all had to deal with that. And it's universal in that sense. And it serves as an existential reminder to live life to the fullest. So guys, I don't know if it's a little sappy or a little broad, but it's one of the main things I was thinking about from this film. Or maybe it's what made Patrick cry. Guys, mortality. What do you guys think?
I
Yeah, take it away.
I can't disagree with anything you said, everything was great and right on. But I took a different theme from the movie as a whole, externalizing and verbalizing the taboo. And that comes from everything from the sickness and the process of being sick to breaking the rule about talking about the endings. And they talked about masturbation out in the open. And he talked about being sick in front of the person who's being sick, and they have a conversation in front of her. That's a taboo about doing that. And they were on drugs accidentally in front of the school. That's a taboo to talk about or do that. There's all these things they're doing that's not correct or not appropriate or not expected. And they do it filmmaking wise, they do it narratively, they do it in the characters. Constantly they're doing something that's like inappropriate. It just came to the point where I'm like, well, this movie actually is about verbalizing and externalizing taboos.
In doing so, is it sort of questioning the power that we give taboos, as if to say, what makes bad words? It's because the power that we assign them. Was the point is to take away their power, sort of show the power that they have in our society, and they don't need to have this power?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good point of view. Yes.
I didn't get that, but it's certainly valid.
You know, I could see the challenging taboos being a thing. That is what children do. They don't understand the taboos.
And there's a sort of reality with these characters because they're not quite children, but they're not quite adults yet.
Yeah, but they you know, a 15-year, 16-year-old, 17-year-old will still say to your face what they shouldn't.
With the grown-ups, the mom hitting on the kid the whole time.
She might have been a writing problem. I know what's going on.
She's great. Molly Shannon's a great actor. It was a broad stroke from a writing perspective, but it fits within your theme, definitely, Matt. The other theme that I had, guys, was related to self-esteem. And I'm going to tie it back to mortality in a way, or at least existentialism, because I feel like the film is sort of blunt about how Greg's deflective behavior and self-described invisibility stems from a low opinion of himself. It informs so many of his choices and attitudes. His relationship with Rachel makes him uncomfortable sometimes because she confronts him and tries to get him to see himself through her eyes, positively. But it's often safer to think less of yourself because that gives you an excuse not to take chances or risks or to put yourself out there. Greggs has films that he keeps secret from his own parents, though I probably would have done the same thing. He's afraid to apply to college in the same way he's afraid to ask a girl out. But perhaps in confronting mortality for the first time, like that rite of passage that we just outlined, he realized that there's no time to wallow in self-pity. After all, Rachel wouldn't like it. His low self-esteem is holding him back from really living, let alone thriving. I think he learns that he needs to accept himself, loving himself, warts and all, before moving forward.
Self-esteem and mortality, it's just too easy of a theme. I don't know what I would say either. Teenage story, of course, self-esteem, right? It's a story about a girl who's dying. Of course, mortality.
The guy that didn't come up with any themes. I can't believe he's like saying mine are too easy.
Those are low-hanging themes.
If it's too easy, it's because the film maybe is a little blunt. But I mean, I do think that a lot of what it was about, or what I took from it, which is the most important thing, part and parcel with mortality thing, it made me think about how limiting low self-esteem can be.
I think self-esteem is definitely in this movie. That's definitely a theme. It was one of my writing/directing inconsistencies, whereas I thought that he was pretty self-confident, but he was presented to us as if he's not supposed to be secure in that way.
You know, I see that point, certainly. I interpreted some of that behavior as deflective. The confidence is really just like him using humor as a defense mechanism. Greg putting on this external show for the world, but then internally struggling to accept himself. Guys, I think it's time to close it out. It's time for closing thoughts.
This isn't an indie film. I don't know about these indie films with these recognizable stuff.
It won the Sundance Film Festival. You were at Sundance.
I know. These films must be sponsored by these big companies, man. These aren't just like raising money from mom and pop. It can't be.
That's a sound-off question down the line, is what constitutes an indie film, because there should be tiers or something, especially for things like Sundance.
Especially at Sundance.
The Indie Spirit Awards. This was nominated for a bunch of Indie Spirit Awards. The Indie Spirit Awards does have the John Cassavetes Award. Films made for under $500,000, but that's only one award, as Linus making another appearance here. So I think that's a valid conversation, but it's a bigger conversation.
You're right. That's not the point. I enjoyed this film. It touched me.
Matt Polis, closing thoughts.
No, I think it was a great choice. Don't worry about your other indie pick that you would have preferred. This is a perfect choice, and I enjoyed watching it. Thank you for introducing me to it.
My pleasure. I'm surprised. I was going to bet that somebody was going to ask me what the other film was, but no one did, so I'm not going to tell you.
I could tell you didn't want to say, so I didn't even try.
Fair enough. If we come back for seventh season, we will be looking at indies from 2016. So it only makes sense for us to start with the film that I named as the best film of 2016 when we did the top 10 of that particular year. So that'll be our first indie, when we're back at the movies, whenever that is in 2021. Next up, however, is our classic movie discussion. This upcoming Thursday, we'll be looking at The Jolson Story from 1946, a biopic about the stage and screen star Al Jolson. That's coming up in just a few days. So, guys, say goodnight to the audience.
Good night, Jonathan. Good night, Patrick.
Good night.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.